Thanks for everybody for being here, and apologies for the previous hiccups, technical hiccups that we had for this live session. We are here in the course of ethic regulation in artificial intelligence, and we are also live streamed now on directly on YouTube. As a series of invited speakers, today we have an exceptional presence. We have with us Kai Zenner, that is the head of office and digital policy advisor for MEP Axel Voss. For the student know, MEP signifies member of European Parliament. And I will leave Kai to do his presentation, but I can assure you, in Brussels, Kai, I think is one of the few people that know the AI Act almost by heart, and even maybe better who wrote the AI Act. And that's why it's great to have Kai here with us. For you, we have been talking extensively about the AI Act. We also have a general overview about other regulation like DSA, DMA, and GDPR. But today, also based on the knowledge that we have, we will listen mostly from Kai. You know, the bit of interesting things about the good and also the bad, that what has been there, right, and what we can expect from the soon entry into force. It's a question of weeks, I think, right? Well, what Kai will tell us of the AI Act. Please, Kai, thanks for being with us. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, first of all, for the invitation. And yeah, sorry also from my side that last week we had those technical issues. I was unfortunately not really able to, to join the Zoom call, which on both sides didn't happen before. But yeah, this time it works. As Pierluigi was saying, I was now involved in the AI Act negotiations since 2022, let's say, but actually also in AI policy on European level for basically 7 years. So it's now quite a journey, and we had a lot of prep work, pre-discussions, and so on and so on. And now the AI Act is there. I will assess it also a little bit in this session and tell you a little bit about the next steps. Maybe to say it already now, I like certain parts of the AI Act very much. On other issues, I'm not very happy, and therefore I think it's very correct to underline that this now basically the adoption of the AI Act is only the first step, and there is a lot of other steps that are still required to make it work. On top of AI policy, I also, what you can see here on the slide, worked in, very, very strongly in the field of privacy, data protection in general, on the digital transition of the European Union, and on a lot of legal topics. And Pierluigi and I actually met in the course of my AI Act work. And maybe one comment already now, I missed a little bit in the AI negotiations that let's say real technical experts like Pierluigi were not really involved. And I think in the final outcome of the AI Act, we see unfortunately in some rather unclear and not realistic obligations of the AI Act. Maybe to start with, on the next slide, you can see a little bit the outline of my presentation that should take roughly 45 minutes or maybe even 1 hour, depending on how long I talk about specific points. If you have, as Pierluigi was saying, if you have some urgent question, you can gladly always just jump in and ask them. Otherwise, we would talk after the presentation about certain points of interest in more detail. In general, I would try to talk about 3 blocks. As I said already, what is the AI Act, what is the history, how to assess the final version, and so on and so on. Then basically related to this first chapter, I will talk a little bit about the policy cycle, about how the European Union is making laws, and why certain things that I underline in the first chapter that didn't go in a good direction and were not solved in a sufficient way, at least in my reading, happened in this way. So what maybe in the policy cycle is not working as it should work. And the third chapter is basically combining then chapter 1 and chapter 3, and is talking with the focus on AI about what does it all mean for our digital competitiveness in the European Union, what can we now do, what is still required, and so on and so on. So this is a little bit the overview of what you will listen to in the next 45 minutes. Maybe to start with on the next slide, you heard probably rather often between, let's say, end of January to April in especially national newspapers in Italy and France and Germany and so on and so on. Or you saw there commentaries and op-eds from people talking about, oh God, there's another European legislation, another digital law, completely outdated, from people who don't have any clue about AI. Why is there another law, and so on and so on, indicating a little bit that yeah, there's over-regulation, and that this is basically just another EU invention and not really necessary. And even though my presentation is a little bit critical here and there, I really want to make this point at the very beginning, that this criticism that I was just summarizing, that again you could especially find in national newspapers, is really unfair and not connected to reality. Why? Because what you see on this slide and also on the following slides, this slide I explain that AI is first of all nothing new. So if now someone is saying, yeah, why is the AI regulation? This technology should first of all further develop until we know in which direction the development will take us, and so on and so on. Those people are a little bit excluding that AI was already there in the 40s and the 50s, the so-called first wave of AI expert systems. So systems where one coder, one expert was putting rules in the system, and the system was then functioning or operating according to this code. And those systems were already covered by legislation. They were part of European product safety legislation, from other laws. Also, our liability laws were already covering AI systems. And the AI Act that is now new, coming on top of that, is kind of often at least complementary with the already existing frameworks. But what it is doing is that it's addressing, and this you see here in the second point, the so-called second wave of data-driven artificial intelligence, so machine learning and deep learning approaches, because there was this feeling that this is really something that is maybe not that sufficiently covered in the existing law, and therefore the legislator needs to come forward with with new laws or new legislative approaches. On the next slide, you see I talk now about certain gaps, and you see an overview that the European Commission did at the very beginning of our legal discussions and policy discussions here on in the European on the European level. And the Commission was kind of underlining that there is, for example, in those new AI systems, again, on machine learning, on deep learning, and so on, a characteristic like autonomy, opacity, unpredictability, meaning that, again, compared to rule-based systems that are basically just doing what the expert was telling them to do, those systems, even though they are not fully autonomous, like you know from sci-fi movies, they are having certain operations or activities that are not fully explainable for the human. And again, this is leading to certain situations. Imagine a drone that is crashing or that is performing a lethal activity and killing a person. And then it's not really clear, was it now the defect of the drone? Was it the mishandling of the operator? Was it a mistake or an actually intentional code by the manufacturer, and so on and so on? And the other points, and especially in combination, those 7 points that you are seeing in on this slide, led to an conclusion here in the European Union that our existing laws that I mentioned already on the previous slide are really not adequate, and at least that we need to, as I said already, complement them with new legislation or by adjusting the already existing legislation. On the next slide, you see that, as I said already, it was not only the European Union that came to this conclusion, but it was really, let's say, a large international alignment. So you can really speak here of an international community effort, because also countries like China or like other Southeast Asian countries, African countries, but also South American countries like Brazil, like Colombia, and so on and so on, were having the same reflections than the European Union. And one thing that is rather positive is that compared to certain security topics like the Palestine war or conflict, or the Ukraine war, or let's think about climate change, where currently many countries in the world have completely different perspectives on what is happening, how to best address certain problems. In AI, there was really this international alignment. And again, countries could, in the end, for example, in the OECD framework, could agree on a list of common principles. On top of the OECD, as you see in this overview, there were discussions in CENELEC, ISO, IEEE. The last two are international standardization bodies. The United Nations, the UNESCO, Council of Europe was working on it, and a lot of smaller formation, let's say. So again, that you can really talk here about an international community effort. On the next slide, you see a little bit how those international principles that countries from China to Canada could agree on, because those principles you find in a very similar way also in the G7 or G20 publications on AI. They are all circling around those concepts of human-centered values, about transparency, explainability, robustness, accountability, and so on, leading now to a situation that even though the European AI Act, if you read it, looks very different from those guidelines that Singapore was adopting, or the automated decision-making law from China, or the executive order from the United States, or the Brazilian AI law. In the end, all those very different policy approaches, in Singapore, it's only a code of conduct, while in the European Union, it's a horizontal law, are based on the same principles, those principles that you can see here, which will lead in the end probably to a situation that a Singapore company has it rather easy to also place their AI systems on the European market or on the US market, because even though our laws or our policies are looking different, if the principles, the core principles are the same, it's of course making later on alignment much more easier. And we see it already, for example, when it comes to the risk assessment. If we now compare what the OECD is working on in this field, or how the US NIST agency is creating a risk management framework, or the European Commission now based on Article 9 is bringing those points together, we see that in the end, it's all looking rather positive. So this, I would say, when it comes to the AI Act, and no matter that there are a lot of points that you can rightfully criticize, is indeed a very, very, very positive point, which again will in the end probably make this topic much more positive and cooperative compared to a lot of others. Now, I was speaking a lot about the history behind the AI Act and all this prep work that mainly happened between, let's say, the mid 2010s, so from 2014 to 2019, 2020. Most of those steps happened on the international level, but there was also a high-level expert group in the European Union. There were several member states in the European Union, like Germany, doing also studies, doing assessments, and so on. And all of those points were then being brought together in the European AI Act. But of course, the European Commission made also a few specific European decisions how to construct the AI Act, and how to put basically everything together. On the next slide, we are now going a little bit deeper in the concept of the AI Act. I will, or I'm singling out in my presentation three core concepts that I think are really unique to the AI Act. And based on those three concepts, another slide will show you a general assessment of the AI Act that I mentioned at the beginning. Starting with the first core concept. The European Union, the Commission, thought that it would be a very, very smart move to use product safety law for AI, because with product safety legislation, the European Union had very positive experiences in the past. If you are thinking about toy safety regulation, radio equipment, regulation or directive earlier on, medical device regulation, and so on. If my counting is right, there are currently 23 product-based safety laws in the European Union, and those laws in combination are really one of the key factors why our internal market is functioning rather well, and why also we don't see a lot of items or products just exploding when we are using them and deploying them, because again, those product safety legislations are based on a very, very well established system where a lot of actors are involved for many, many years, know themselves, they know the procedures, and so on and so on. For example, products that are falling under those product safety laws are always having a CE marking, they are getting accreditation, detection from notified bodies. There are conformity assessments, either internal or external, via notified bodies, and so on and so on. So there is basically a lot of check and balance. And this check and balance, again, is so established, and even after placing the product on the market, there's a lot of market surveillance, again, either by companies or by public authorities, that even though a lot of things are happening within companies, we as customers, but also the state, can trust companies to a certain extent, because even if they would cheat at certain stages in the process, there are so many possibilities from other actors to find out that there are not that many scandals happened. Of course, we all think about the Volkswagen case and a few others where things went south and problems occurred. But if you are just thinking about how many products we have on the market and how few big scandals were there, then I think we all agree that, again, in general, this approach is quite well. And this approach is rather innovation friendly because of those strong focus on internal controls, letting companies deal with a lot of those elements by themselves, and so on. And the commission was then thinking, okay, let's just put artificial intelligence in the same category in an innovation friendly way, so that companies right now that are just let's say getting into this exciting field of AI are not immediately overburdened with new, let's say, obligations, with crazy new rules that are not really pre-tested, and so on. In principle, this decision, I think, um, was rather smart. Where it's getting a little bit complicated is that AI, compared to toy safety or medical devices, is of course a super horizontal field, because, as you know, AI is being deployed in the health sector, in the smart city sector, in the education sector, in the B2C sector. So we are all using AI in our phones, now with Copilot in Microsoft products, and so on and so on. So having basically a product safety legislation that is not narrow on one specific product, but basically covering hundreds, thousands of different products, is already problematic. Moreover, AI is such an invasive field, let's say, because AI has such a strong impact that the Commission was feeling only the new legislative framework is not enough. We need to bring in stronger fundamental rights protection, because if in the future, for example, an AI system is deciding if person X is allowed to get or benefit from a public service, and this AI system is hugely biased, then this product safety legislation that is just safeguarding against violation of safety and health is not really enough. It also needs to safeguard against fundamental rights protection violation. But the big issue is not only is product safety, let's say, used to just address narrow product categories and not something so huge and horizontal like AI. Product safety legislation also doesn't have any experience with how to protect fundamental rights. And this combination, again, leads to one unique factor of how the European Union was creating the AI Act, and also puts a big question mark about the future enforcement and implementation, because no one really knows if what the Commission did here and what we as co-legislator in the end agreed to is working. On the next slide, you see another conceptual decision of the European Commission that we as co-legislator, member state and parliamentarians agreed to. On top of the product safety legislation, the Commission also, in order to not harming innovation, took a risk-based approach, meaning you saw this pyramid probably several times already in the internet and also in newspapers. The Commission was thinking, okay, there is a large level, the biggest level, as it is posing only minimal or even no risk. Those AI systems should now not be overburdened at this early stage of AI development, especially in the second wave of AI, machine learning, deep learning, with some intensive legal obligations. So those should be not regulated. Then there is a second level of systems that are posing limited risk. And also this AI system should just do basically the most necessary thing to basically disclose that you are facing an AI system, but not really much more. And then in the end, the AI Act is just focusing on those two categories, those unacceptable risks that are prohibited, and those high-risk AI systems that are posing, in principle at least, a severe risk of, for example, harming our fundamental rights. Those systems that are really the focus area of the AI Act would in the future need to fulfill certain high risk obligations like risk assessment, technical documentation, transparency, human oversight. So many of those principles that you saw in the previous slide from the OECD. The big issue is, even though this risk-based approach makes a lot of sense when it comes to not harming innovation by just focusing on those areas that are, at least on the paper, risky, the big issue is that the Commission didn't really do a proper impact assessment. They made an impact assessment on paper, but in this impact assessment, they didn't assess how many systems would potentially fall into those four different risk categories. There is an annexed risk assessment, or let's say risk category assessment, from a Brussels-based think tank called CEPS, which in 2021 evaluated that potentially between 5 to 15% of all AI systems would in the future be classified as high risk. But no one really knows if this number still applies in current times. CEPS and we both tried to ask the Commission for a new impact assessment, but unfortunately, the Commission was unwilling to do so because they were saying that it takes too much time, that it's not really necessary. And Pierluigi and I know it from the Parliament. The Parliament is often underlining that we should stick to better regulation principles, but we ourselves as European Parliament would be obliged to do an alternative impact assessment because of several of significant changes that we were doing. And we as Parliament could also have done some research how many AI systems would be affected by those four risk categories. But also the Parliament said in the end, no, let's not lose time, let's just go for it. Meaning that, similar to the previous slide about product safety legislation and the unclear question if it's fitting for AI, also here, no one really knows if not the pyramid is maybe upside down. Maybe most systems are prohibited in the future or are falling under high risk, and only a few systems are in the end minimal or no risk. No one knows. I think it's in the end something in between. But again, from a lawmaking perspective, I think we did a terrible job to come out with a law not knowing how many systems are affected by those new piece of legislation. On the next slide, you see the last conceptual points that I want to highlight. And this is something, well, speaking now from the European Parliament, we proposed, and we think with what we improved the AI Act quite significantly, because in the original proposal by the European Commission, only in this slide level 3 or level 4 within the AI value chain would be affected by the new upcoming legislations. The Commission envisioned that basically only companies like, let's take the German software company SAP that are especially active in the B2B sector would qualify as high-risk AI system provider, and then companies like an Italian startup that are buying a commercialized AI product from SAP, the provider, would become deployer because they are not really changing this AI system, but they are basically just letting it operate. And those two actors then would need to fulfill all the high risk obligations that are listed in Article 16, in Article 26 for the deployer, while especially those powerful US and Chinese upstream companies that are, for example, cloud provider, that are model providers, that are dataset providers, and so on, would be not at all falling in the scope of the AI Act. So they would not need to make their products, for example, more transparent, more safe, and so on and so on. But even worse, they would also not be obliged to share any information with those downstream companies or actors, also universities, that would need to fulfill the obligations of the AI Act. One information that we received from a lot of stakeholders, civil society, companies, but also academics, was, let's say, negative use cases of how certain, let's call it, US tech companies, starting with an M, are often treating their customers, creating situations where their customers are becoming completely liable for things that those US big tech companies are responsible for. If there's, for example, a wrong coded piece of your AI system that you bought from a Californian company, again, in my example, SAP in the end would become liable or responsible after the AI Act, would face huge fines, and so on and so on. So basically what the parliament then did conceptually was to take a little bit the focus away from level 3, level 4. They are still obliged to fulfill the majority of the obligations because they are close to the AI system that is commercialized, that is put on the market, that is deployed, and so on and so on. So, of course, in my example, the SAP, the German company, and the Italian startup would need to cooperate closely. They would need to engage heavily with the public authorities. But now, thanks to the parliament, level 1 would be here, for example, OpenAI, but also level 2, which would be, for example, Oracle, the database software provider, would be obliged to tell SAP everything about data governance that is already taking place on their level. For example, Oracle would need to say, look, our data set was trained mainly in the United States, so you will, for example, have a rather bias when it comes to language, because it's only happening or it was only trained on English content and maybe a little bit of Spanish content. And so on and so on. But this is really extremely required and important information for level 3 and level 4 in order to become compliant. And in the end, also level 5, the affected person is benefiting a lot from it, because the product that he is or she is engaging with, that he or she is affected by, because, for example, the AI system in my case that I illustrated here, the AI system is leading to a rejection for a public service. And then the affected person, due to our holistic approach when it comes to the value chain, would have a much better understanding why there was a certain problem, would probably have it much easier to get redress, to make a legal claim, and so on and so on. On the next slide, you see a little bit a very, very specific topic that I now not go that much into detail, but you can read it up in the internet if you are interested in it. Of course, the European legislator was also affected by the release of ChatGPT. It was something completely new and unexpected, what the European Commission also didn't put in the AI Act, because when they drafted it, foundation models were a small niche of AI technology. We as legislator were then thinking, first of all, when you think about the AI value chain that I just presented to you in the previous slide, probably those models will become very, very, very dominant in this value chain, and therefore it would be competition-wise unfair if they would not need to fulfill any obligations. And our left-wing colleagues in the European Parliament were also afraid that even on model level, there are already certain risks for fundamental rights protections. For fundamental rights, there would be certain harms that are already likely to happen. And this is why we as legislator in the end were pushing extremely strong for not including the model level in the AI Act, because the AI Act should still focus on system level. But we wanted that the model provider needs to share all necessary information, as you heard on the previous slide, but also shapes the model to an extent that is possible already a little bit in a way that is in the end on system level required for providers and developers to perform. On the next slide, you see one additional change that we made, because in order to promote innovation, especially by startups in the field of foundation models and generative AI, we said that in the end, it's probably smart to focus with this foundation model system alignment approach that I was just talking about on those models that are really having a unique position in the AI value chain when it comes to market concentration, but also when it comes to potential risks for the end users. You see here on the right side a table that I created in 2013 when I made or when I was writing an OECD article that you saw on the previous slide on the left side. And yeah, if you want to read more about this topic, just check OECD and my name and foundation models, and you will find it. And there are also a lot of other articles that are going a little bit more in this direction. But I don't want to talk that much about this topic in order to still manage to get every slide discussed that I want to discuss with you. And now, based on those three conceptual points, I would try to make a general assessment of the AI Act, and with that, concluding the first chapter of my presentation. On the next slide, you see such an overview that I was now talking about of very positive but also very negative point. And I would just now go through this list. On the positive side, you see what I talked already about in my first set of slides, that the AI Act, compared to a lot of previous digital legislation that was coming from Brussels, is making one thing really, really well, that it's not trying to do in EU unique or specific thing, which alienates us from the rest of the world, is putting us at odds with different approaches in the UK, in the US. But from the very beginning, the AI Act was really trying to work with all of our international partners and still trying to, let's say, address certain issues that are unique for our European legal system and history, but even in those areas, not going completely against international principles that have been found on all those different international fora that I presented you at the very beginning. There, for example, you see now in Article 3 point one in the OECD, in the AI definition, that we took the same definition like the OECD, like the definition that you can find in the executive order of the United States, and so on, meaning that we have a situation where a lot of countries are already defining AI in the same, or at least in a very similar way, which again makes our life in the future much easier. Where we also did, I would say, a good job as European legislator is that we worked a little bit against the Commission's approach of creating a completely horizontal piece of legislation, and let's say reconstructing the AI Act in a more US or UK way, so that now in the AI Act, especially in those high risk obligations, we have more principles that are leading or heading in a direction where high risk AI system provider needs to go. But in the end, let's talk, for example, about data governance. Every provider has a little bit room of maneuver how to fulfill those obligations. To give you an example, in Article 10, data governance, there's an obligation to create a data set that is fully representative, not biased, that should not have errors in it, and so on. Those points are extremely important when it's coming to an AI system that is used in the H&R sector. So deciding about which applications should be rejected, which applications should pass in the next round, and so on. Because there, of course, we don't want to see discrimination, bias, for example, against Germans, and so on and so on. If we are talking about the health sector, it's extremely important that, for example, medical devices that are there to protect or to support pregnant women are really focusing on health data that is coming from women that are pregnant or are able to become pregnant. My health data is not relevant, but with the original commission proposal, basically those companies would need to fulfill this obligation of having unbiased data sets. This again, also compared to other digital legislation, I think in the AI Act is going in a really good direction that should be much more future proof, and is really this principle based approach that many IT experts and digital companies were demanding for many, many years. And finally, in the AI Act, I think we as legislator have delivered a little bit. Burden sharing along the AI value chain, I already talked a lot about it. I think with our proposal, and now with the AI Act that is coming into or entering into force soon, we basically worked a little bit against market concentration and potentially helped especially smaller European SMEs and startups to compete a little bit better with large tech corporations. We have also tried out other new points of doing legislation. For example, we have included a presumption of conformity that gives especially smaller companies a rather easy and cheap way of becoming compliant with the AI Act via technical harmonized standards. Those technical harmonized standards are already being developed by Sensenelec and other standardization bodies, where industry, but also academics and civil society are already engaging, are contributing use cases. And in the end, those technical standards can also be constantly adjusted. So if there is a new development in the field of AI, those technical standards can be quickly updated, and we don't need to always update the AI Act, because there, if you look to past legislation like the GDPR and the data protection field, the GDPR was adopted in 2016, entered into force in 2018. And even though there were already problems known back then, the GDPR is still unchanged and in place like it was adopted 2016. With the AI Act, via those technical standards, those things will not happen in the same way. And even though we cannot change the core concepts of the AI Act, at least on a more technical level, we can make rather significant changes. On the other hand, of course, this is maybe a little bit at odds with the democracy principle, because here the co-legislator, the parliament, as a representative of the population, is giving up power to some non-democratic actor like standardization bodies. And we could talk a lot about those bodies, if they are really transparent, if they are really democratic, if they are including civil society enough, and so on. But again, in principle, I think this step makes a lot of sense. And the last point, on the positive side, is going in a similar direction. Not only technical harmonized standards are there are also delegated acts, implementing acts, there are the regulatory sandboxes, guidelines, templates, and so on. So there will be a lot of secondary legislation following the AI Act, with which the AI Act will be further specified and again will be able to be adjusted after there are new developments. Stakeholders like civil society also has in the future, and this is why I wrote cooperative law, will have a lot of opportunities, not only via standardization bodies, but also via the advisory forums, the scientific panel, and other new mechanisms in the AI Act. They will have a lot of opportunities to create changes to indicate that certain things are maybe going in the wrong direction. Those points are all extremely positive. And again, here, the European legislator learned a lot from previous mistakes and really created a much more dynamic and future-oriented law, which is really key to something that is developing so fast like artificial intelligence. Now to 5 negative points that I mostly already indicated. when we talked about conceptual choices of the AI Act. First of all, I still don't know if AI as a evolving technology, constantly evolving technology, is really a fit for something like product safety that is working really well with a vacuumer, with a hammer, with a medical device, and so on, but not with something that can be trained new capabilities, can perform different tasks, and so on and so on. This could mean that in the end, companies would need to perform constantly new conformity assessment, risk assessments, and so on, because their products are constantly changing. The horizontal scope of the AI Act, that all AI systems, no matter the use case and the sector, are being affected, is also leading, even though we addressed some of the problems, is leading to potentially a lot of legal overlaps with other already existing legislation, but also creates a lot of problem in the governance and in the enforcement sector, because here the existing agencies and market surveillance authorities are all, of course, already enforcing in the field, for example, finance and AI. And now there are a lot of new players that also want to enforce in this area. Who is then in the lead? No one really knows. So also here, a big question mark. The vague text and unclear procedures I indicated already several times. The AI Act in the end was really pushed through, and we should probably have spent more time to make crystal clear how certain obligations need to be fulfilled, what certain definitions really mean and are covering. The next negative point, the prohibitions and the high-risk AI use cases I already mentioned, also those points are really blurry. And again, the evidence is missing. No one really knows what AI systems are falling under this category. And you just need to think about companies that are trying to have clarity when it comes to investments that they are doing in, for example, developing a new AI system. If they at the moment don't really know if what they are developing is high risk or even prohibited in a few months, those companies, especially if they are smaller and if they are lacking the legal expertise and also the political connections, will potentially decide against the development of an AI system because all those uncertainties that I mentioned. And the last and final point are issues with the training of data and also access to high quality data sets. Those points are not really solved, neither by the AI Act and also not really, at least now, with the Data Act or Data Governance Act and other new legislation, probably leading again to a situation where a lot of companies are leaving the European Union to train data. We saw it with Stability AI, that were going to the United States and training their model there, and then coming back and are now facing a court case because of violations of the GDPR. Many companies are struggling with this issue, that they are not really able, compared to US and Chinese companies, to access and to train their data. So as you see with this overview, there are a lot of pros and a lot of cons. And in the next chapter, and I'm trying to make the next two chapters rather short so that we still have time to do a discussion. But in the next chapter, on the next slide, you see a little bit a reason why a law like the AI Act is being adopted with such a, let's say, strange list of pro and cons, because most of the cons, I think, were rather easy to avoid or to mitigate. So the immediate question arises, why were those players in the European Union not more careful and did spend a little bit more time in making the AI Act clearer and reducing the level of legal uncertainty? In my opinion, the reason for this lack of quality when it comes to lawmaking can be found in the policy cycle that you can find here. Normally, the policy cycle is rather complicated. I summarized it here in 9 different steps. And in those different steps, there are a lot of different safeguards. You see it, for example, here in the middle. European Commission needs to perform an ex-ante impact assessment, needs to do a consultation on the other side, also Commission after the adoption of the law needs to make a review, needs to make an ex post assessment, and so on and so on. So in principle, as you see on the next slide, there is this concept of better regulation in place in the European Union that is fully integrated in our daily life. Also here in the European Parliament, there is in principle the obligation, if we as assistants, advisors, and parliamentarians are agreeing to shift away or move away a lot from the original proposal from the European Commission, we would need to involve people like Pierluigi and even more his colleagues from the European Parliament Research Service, and they would need to provide us evidence if those changes that we are calling for are really making sense and are aligned with the European laws and the European system. As you see here also, there are calls for evidence, there are feedback, and so on and so on. So normally, those problems that I now summarized in my AI Act presentation should really not happen. But why they are happening? You are seeing it now on the next slide. And I'm going through all 3 institutions. First of all, the Commission. The next slide shows you the political level of the European Commission. They have 27 commissioners from every member state of the European Union. And all those commissioners are not really administrative people, so people that are used to work evidence-based in a ministry and so on. Those people are normally policymakers. If you are coming from a country like Germany, it's actually often policymakers that had scandals or that are very old, that are then being sent to the European Union and that are trying in the end to achieve some political goals. They have 33 directorates behind them. So basically the services that are working for those commissioners. And those commissioners are competing with each other about, for example, public recognition. Here I marked Commissioner Breton from France and Commissioner Vestager that were both responsible for the AI Act, and both wanted to be seen as Mr. or Mrs. AI. And often we're trying to outmaneuver each other. If you are now looking at the next slide, you are seeing DG Connect. DG Connect is the Directorate General that is basically the digital minister of the Ministry of the European Union. And here on the left side, you see the third box, which is Kilian Gross unit, A1, so in Directorate 1A. He was responsible together with his team for the AI Act. But due to the fact that there are 27 different commissioners that all wanted to have a little bit of the fame and spotlight of AI policy, those other DGs also wanted to get involved in the AI Act. But Kilian Gross, also because of his own let's say, advance in the European Commission when it comes to promotions, but also his boss, Lucia, or her boss, Roberto Viola. They were trying to keep basically most of the competences and the power in the unit of Kilian Gross, leading to a situation that Kilian Gross unit was not even talking and cooperating that much with other units in this DG Connect. For example, those units that you can see in the middle of the DG Connect that were doing the Data Act and the Data Governance Act, which should have talked quite a lot. But in the commission, again, it was mainly two commissioners that didn't like each other and one unit that were basically doing all the work and were almost forbidden to cooperate and to listen to other units. If you watch the next slide, before I'm now only bashing the commission, basically the same you can see in the member states. There it was Coreper 1, and there the configuration, transport, telecommunication, and energy. And they are one of the working parties with 27 digital attaches that were responsible for AI. And all the other working groups that were, for example, also having a lot of knowledge on agriculture and digital, competitiveness and AI, education and AI, and so on, were kind of excluded because this working party was saying, no, AI is only us. If you are now going to the next slide, you will see the same problem in the European Parliament. Unfortunately, here the first yellow highlight shifted a little bit too much to the top, so it should be the Libe committee one below that was responsible together with the IMCO committee, the second highlighted committee. And those two lead committees were trying to exclude all other committees. My boss and I, we are not only in the Libe committee, so one of the lead committees, but also in the legal committee. And we always tried to bring in the perspective of the legal committee, but those two committees just didn't want to listen to us. So basically in all three institutions, you see a lot of competition and a lot of, let's say, reason for excluding all those other experts that are out there. And the conclusion or the effect you see now on the next slide, that we see a lot of incoherence, a lot of legislative overlaps. This overview I created at the very beginning of the AI Act negotiations, where it was already clear that, for example, the new Digital Services Act, DSA, has several paragraphs and articles that are completely at odds and overlapping with certain articles in the AI Act, which again comes or goes back to the reason of Kilian Gross not talking with Prabat, the head of unit for the DSA, and in the parliament, the DSA people not talking with us, the AI Act people, or vice versa. In the end, we often didn't know about those overlaps. When we were informed from stakeholders, the DSA people often didn't really want to work with us. So in the end, nothing really changed. Some of those overlaps we were able to put away, but a lot of them are still existing. And this gets even worse if you look in on the next slide. There are unfortunately a little bit too much new laws out now, especially in the last 5 years. There are in total 116 initiatives in the digital field on the European level. And the AI Act is only one in the, I think, 8 column of this table. One of those new laws that is not really coherent with the other laws. But the same can be said about the Platform Work Directive, about the DMA, and so on. So we will have in the next years a lot of laws that are not really fitting to each other, where it's completely unclear which law is lex specialis, which is lex generalis, what is happening if there's an overlap, if there's a contradiction. So in a best case scenario, we will probably need 2, 3, 4, 5 years to make sense out of this very, very complex system. In the next slide, you see that the same is also true for governance. Here, just a very quick overview of what is coming now with the AI Act on top. And if you look on the next slide, you will see a similar table to my law table. So there are not only a lot of legal overlaps, but also enforcement implementation overlaps. Here you see that there are already bodies or institutions like the European Central Bank, like European ENISA, Cybersecurity Agency. There is the high-level group of the DMA that is talking already a lot of competition, also when it comes to competition in AI. And it's completely unclear how those new AI public authorities on EU level are now cooperating with the existing EU bodies that are responsible for AI in other fields. And this is only the EU level. The same is now also coming on national level, of course, where also a lot of authorities are already in place. And now I just talk 5 more minutes so that we have at least 15 minutes left for our Q&A. I will quickly talk in the third chapter what this all means. So in the next slide, you see that the original idea of the European Union was, well, we are lacking behind United States and China when it comes to large-scale investments, when it comes to commercializing our top-notch leading AI experts in academia, in research. We are lacking a vibrant ecosystem for startups. We are lacking venture capitalists and so on. So what can we do as European Union to also get a little bit of a piece when it comes to artificial intelligence? The European Union in the past made laws and with the GDPR, at least to a certain extent, achieved the so-called Brussels effect. And therefore, also with the AI Act, the idea was, okay, on top of those international principles, we are now quickly building or creating an AI law that is then basically copy pasted in a lot of other regions in the world. And by that, we are creating a competition advantage, a competitive edge for our European companies, because then in the future, basically the European AI Act will be very similarly implemented in countries like Japan and so on and so on. On the next slide, you see how this would look in theory. The third way on AI from Europe would basically, take a risk-based approach, would connect it with ethical and trustworthy principles for AI, would make AI safe and in situations where harm was being created by AI, would provide a strong liability regime, and again, would be based on international principles that are rather similar everywhere. This was the ambition. In reality, on the next slide, and I will not repeat everything, we are now having a situation where basically there is huge legal uncertainty if our extremely complex, maybe even overcomplicated AI Act will work. And especially if you think back 2 slides before, where I quickly summarized the US and the Chinese and the European approach on AI, we will have, or we have the situation that the European Union is already lacking behind. And now we are creating a situation where our companies, at least in the next months and probably 2, 3 years, are facing a lot of legal uncertainty how we are implementing the AI Act. Do I really fall under high risk or not? Do I need to do an external conformity assessment or not? When do I need to perform another risk assessment, and so on and so on? Meaning that probably AI development is becoming extremely risky and maybe disincentivizing many companies to invest in AI, or they can still do it, but then need to invest a lot of money in very expensive third-party certification or auditing by big law firms like Freshfield, like Allen Overy, and so on, or big four accounting firms like KPMG, Ernst and Young, and so on. I think, especially in the next years, those companies will be the biggest, yeah, beneficiaries of the AI Act, because they are, especially in this transition period until everything becomes more clear, are really needed. What could happen, by this transition period, that now the European companies are really losing this super important moment in time to catch up, to also develop good advanced AI technologies, and in the end are becoming more like customers of US and Chinese companies, because we really missed out this opportunity. In the next slide, and this is now the last thing I want to say, is that not all hope is lost. And now I'm going back to my positive points of the AI Act. There are, if you remember, there are now much more, compared to previous digital laws, much more opportunities for stakeholders to interfere, to contribute with best practices, and so on. And there's also this big chance of creating secondary legislation, and with the secondary legislation, defining a little bit how to fulfill the AI Act. You need to have in mind that the AI Act has a very complicated system of transition periods, meaning that some parts of the AI Act will become already applicable in the winter of this year, the prohibitions and foundation models, generative AI next summer, the majority of the AI Act summer 26, and the sectorial legislation in summer 27. On the next slide, you see what you, and especially what companies, should do in those different transition periods, making really priorities what is now extremely urgent. So right now, really the prohibitions. And for those prohibitions, for example, right now, it's all about sharing expertise. So sending use cases to the Commission that they can take over in their guidelines, and in those guidelines, in the end, clarifying what social scoring that is in the future prohibited in the European Union really means. Are commercialized services that banks and insurances are already using today certainly prohibited? Probably we don't want to prohibit them because they are useful, for example, to prevent anti-fraud, to prevent fraud, so using anti-fraud mechanisms, and so on and so on. So right now, again, it's all about making the Commission aware of those things. Also, standardization bodies. I said how important standards are in the end. It's extremely important that a lot of different actors are joining those bodies and are contributing their expertise there. a third point, there is now this new concept of regulatory sandbox where you are able to engage with the regulator and with public authorities, with enforcers in a very close manner, and both can benefit from regulatory learning. But companies, especially smaller ones, probably struggle to send someone in those regulatory sandboxes. Somehow we need to make it work that those sandboxes are really used by everyone, because also they could help to make sense of all those vague AI Act obligations. And the fourth and last point is, hopefully companies are thinking a little bit broader, and thinking a bit about the points that I made when I talked about an AI governance ecosystem. Many of the students that are watching this live stream now live or later are in a rather lucky situation, because I think this ecosystem of AI governance is creating a lot of jobs, not only in the public sector, but also in the private sector. And it's really necessary that there are a lot of really good people working on both sides, because also the public sector needs a lot of good foundation model, deep learning experts, because those experts need to understand what companies are providing for feedback and so on. So in the end, it's really about building up an ecosystem where people are talking, are understanding each other, and are working in a good way with each other. And last slide, now really last slide, is that hopefully it's not stopping with this ecosystem of AI governance, which would in the end create point number one, a favorable regulatory framework. But this overview is going back to an either special committee AI report from the European Parliament that Pierluigi actually also contributed to when he was working in the Parliament, where we as European Parliament were saying, okay, the AI Act is not all. We need to think much broader. And you see a little bit what else we think is missing and what we hope is coming, especially with the new commission in the next term. So talking, for example, also how to combine sustainability, Green Deal with AI. There's a huge field about digital green infrastructure, saving energy, that is so far really disregarded. And we hope as European Parliament that the new Commission is really connecting the dots and using also those potential synergies between different sectors. Again, my main point is the road of AI policy is really just at the beginning. There's a lot of things required to follow. And especially for students, I think it's a very interesting fields with amplified job opportunities, as I mentioned before. Sorry for talking so long, but yeah, I would be also available a few minutes over time if there are a lot of questions.
Well, first of all, big round of applause for Kai. And I'm pretty sure students have enjoyed too much. We had done previously discussion about this, and there was several points. Any question from the students, or I can kickstart the discussion? Please go ahead. Don't be shy, first of all. Yes, Francesca.
Yeah. Hi. First of all, thank you. It was very clear, very interesting, especially to me, which who am very interested in governance of AI. I have a question. In the past, I was working as an auditor for medical devices, and I noticed in your speech when you talked about the product safety law, of course, that it has to take into consideration also fundamental rights for AI. Do you foresee a sort of CE mark, but which is more related to human-centered, so a human-centered AI mark, something like this in the future of AI? Of course, just a personal opinion, just to understand, because I would like to understand the accreditation. How would it work?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think in the end, this would be the vision that the Commission and also the other, the co-legislator had. The big problem is, as I said, and as you know much better than myself, that medical device notified bodies and market surveillance authorities are experts on medical devices, but they are not really experts on biases, on discrimination, and so on. So there is a lot of new input, new expertise that those sectors and those actors need to learn over the next years, and probably also new people need to join. So, for example, on notified bodies, and on those notified authorities that are assessing bodies and are registering bodies. We made now it an obligation that they need to hire people that have an in-depth knowledge about fundamental rights protection, international laws. They need to hire lawyers, and so on and so on. Right now, at least in Germany, what we are hearing is that TÜV Süd and DEKRA doesn't have anyone basically that is knowledgeable in this part. Also, technical standards, as you know, are currently not there. They are currently being discussed in Sensenelec level. And what I hear there from Sensenelec and DIN, the German standardization body, is that they are struggling a lot to make technical standards on fundamental rights, leading to a situation that maybe the Commission then need to complement those technical standards via common specifications. It's basically another tool that could fill those gaps where standardization is not possible. But in any way, it all takes time. And this again probably will lead to huge legal uncertainty in the next 3, 4, 5 years until the system is going. This would be my point. So right now, to say very quickly, give a very clear answer, I share your indications that I heard within the question that so far notified bodies from MDR would probably struggle to fulfill all AI Act obligations. And there again, we also have this problem that MDR and AI Act are overlapping legally, and also that there are different enforcement bodies that where it's unclear who is really leading and who not. So not only on a knowledge level there's unclarity, but also on a, let's say, competition level and on a legal level there's a huge question mark. And best case scenario, we will find a solution how it's working, but this best case solution or best case scenario will also take a little bit of time.
Is there any other question from the students live? Yes, Francesca, go ahead.
Yeah, I will limit to another one, then I will leave the place to anybody else. I was also interested because now I'm actually working into the banking field, which has, of course, very complicated governance framework creation for AI. Do you suggest any sandbox at the European level to follow or field of regulation where to work?
You mean now with a specific focus on the financial sector, or yeah? Well, I can here just say basically our wish as European Parliament. We as European Parliament, and we don't trust the Commission very much in a lot of points, but we will try to, via public means, via social media, to push and continue to push for it. Our original idea was, why now every member state makes a general sandbox? It doesn't really make sense. If, for example, in Spain and Germany, you do everything in the same sandbox, and therefore not really developing a high level of knowledge. What we always found much better is that, for example, Romania and Greece, because of ENISA, have already a lot of knowledge in cybersecurity. So why not should they focus in their regulatory sandbox in the field of cybersecurity? Then let's now take a little bit of lazy examples. Frankfurt and maybe Luxembourg have a lot to do with banks. So maybe those two are focusing on banks. Then Germany is doing a lot in machinery and robotics. So maybe they have federal regulatory sandbox that is specifying on that. Going a little bit in the direction what you can find now already in digital innovation hubs that can also be found across the European Union, that are also then going into national focus topics. And another idea that we had as European Parliament that you can now find also in the law is that we said, okay, maybe for all member states, it's especially for smaller ones, it's a little bit expensive and maybe also expertise related, not really possible to build up a fully fledged sandbox on their own. So maybe then let's allows member states to join forces. We put it in the law, so in the future, maybe we will see a sandbox for the whole Baltics, focusing on e-governance and military stuff, for example. Then another sandbox for the Iberian coast, so Portugal and Spain joining, or Benelux, or Romania and Bulgaria to save money, and so on. And then, of course, it would be quite nice if they could focus on some cluster topics. Again, this would be our theory and our wish as Parliament. The Council was rather open-minded. Now it depends a lot on the Commission if they are really promoting this idea.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you allow us a few more minutes, there are a couple of questions online.
Sure.
Of course, they all thank you for the very insightful presentation. The first question is, I'm not sure I understand it correctly, so help me also understand it better. Aren't the legal obligations task dependent? Why would there be a different legal framework to solve a problem using AI or some other tool? Not sure
You
if
mean, yeah. So you mean if where the problem is if there are those legal overlaps that I was talking about?
Yeah, exactly. I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So a simple example that we fixed. Again, the big problem is that there is a large unknown number of legal overlaps that we were not even aware of, and there are some legal overlaps that we were aware of that for political reasons we were unable to solve. Others we solved that would created a situation that, for example, with the Commission's version of Article 17 on quality management system, you as provider of an AI system would have already a quality management system, for example, in the medical device area in place. And now, based on the AI Act, Article 17, you would need to create a parallel quality management system that is maybe creating different assessments and results. Because of that, you are acting and you are changing your product. But with those changes, then you would violate obligations that are coming out of the results of your quality management system based on the medical device regulation. And very, very strongly, this became, let's say, visible when it comes to GDPR. We had there some obligations in the GDPR that by fulfilling them, you would automatically violate AI Act obligations. Again, those we fixed, for example, with Article 10 paragraph 5 with the data protection impact assessment references in the fundamental rights impact assessment in the AI Act and so on. But it's those obligations, especially on technical documentation, on risk assessments and so on, that you need to fulfill because of law number 1, but then also because of law number 2 that are not coherent with each other. And that, of course, creates higher costs, higher compliance costs, but sometimes, as I said, in the case of the GDPR, creates a situation that, for example, a company needs to fulfill to the best extent possible an relevant and representative data set, but this company cannot process personal data to such an extent to fulfill this obligation. And this, again, is one of the unsolved, most obvious legal conflicts that we have, that no one really knows how to solve it. It could be solved via guidelines of the European Commission that, in the spirit of Article 10.5, that is about special categories of data, in the future there is some leeway when it comes to data processing. But right now, no one really knows.
Yes, indeed. I also think this is very strange situation. Yeah. Last question that has been asked from the live stream, very perfect for finishing up. When we can expect the final version to be published in the official journal? I think she's still on mute, Kai.
Yes, I'm on mute. So good question. Many people are asking it. We will have this week on Thursday the final vote in the parliament. It's not even a real vote, so basically just the adjusted version by lawyer, linguists, and legal service is passing committee and then also plenary, and next week plenary, and then yeah, basically from then, basically almost every day the commission would be allowed to publish the text. Probably, so normally it takes 4 or 5 months, but the European Commission in particular wants to use the AI Act as a means in the European election to showcase that we as European Union delivered and so on and so on. And therefore, I think there's a strong push to take some shortcuts, maybe to not have all translations perfectly fine, but just go with, let's say, rather okayish English version and basically then publish it. And this means that I expect already in May or at latest in June publication in the official journal. And then, as you know, we have 20 additional days, and after that the law will enter into force.
Yes, let's see when this will happen. So let's thank Kai once again for this very insightful talk from everybody. And for the students, actually, we will see each other tomorrow for the data science and AI application course. And this will be the last lecture. And the final lecture of ethics and regulation will be on Friday. We will be in both lessons 2 other invited speaker. And thank you for everybody. Thank you for the people on the live stream listening. Thanks again to Kai. Kai, we will see soon each other in Brussels. And we will finish here for today.